Hello, Internet. It's the IPython Lab Meeting for October 2nd, 2014. We have a reduced cast this week due to various reasons. So maybe this will be a short one.
You can always hope.
One can always hope. Someone asked for waiting for author needs review to show up first in the list.
Yeah, because it's painful to always scroll or search to toggle. I will just have the two at the top, if possible. If you don't mind having like uppercase A dash just to have them on the top.
Yeah, it is case-sensitive sorting. So if we just made everything else lowercase, they'd come first. Yeah, I'd be fine with that. I'm not thrilled about the waiting for author, since authors that aren't us can't uncheck it. So waiting for author isn't necessarily in a valid state if the PR is from anyone other than us.
Yeah, but if like once a week you go through all the waiting for author and check that there is no new commit, it's really helpful to
theory,
just sort.
But in the long term, we're just not going to do that. I think experience has shown that every time we try to come up with some kind of organized tagging like that, it kind of falls by the wayside.
Then the need for review doesn't help either.
That's true. I mean, because they're not reliable, they don't. And we could say, never unmark PRs from other people. We could also look into hooks that say any activity on a PR, just any event on PR changes it to needs review. We can look at that. But yeah, if you want to just rename them so they show up first, I think you could just put a space or an underscore or whatever up front.
Yeah, I just don't want for people to ask what is this 0 in front or A or whatever.
Yeah, I'd use a non-letter character if it works. Yeah. DSU linked something about prompt toolkit. You want to talk about that?
Yep. Someone made a wrapper around IPython that make a real multi-line editing with up and down and with live syntax highlighting. Little like ByPython that Paul did, but much better. If you install the package, you need to type pt IPython, and you have real multi-line editing. So I just wanted to say that to the internet. You can try. Maybe at some point we can look at having this automatically the default if Python toolkit is.
Yeah, I'd be interested in the relationship between that and BPython.
Yep.
Cool.
John says we are trying to connect.
Okay. Then if they're John and Brian, I presume.
I battle. He's still in New York, and it's John and
John Sylvan.
Yeah.
Okay. So Brian asked some stuff about what to do if you open a notebook where save's going to fail. And this comes up in things like Jupyter Hub or situations where you might have assignment notebooks that you prevent users from being able to save.
And for me, it's such an edge case that you should just have a dialogue if it fails.
Yeah, but so that's the problem is with the Jupyter Hub multi-user stuff. It's becoming less of an edge case. It's an edge case now because it's your server. You opened a notebook. There aren't that many notebooks that you on a personal server that you would open that you can't save. Like that's a failure condition. But in the multi-user case, it makes sense to have notebooks that you can't save. And right now, all the saving still happens. You just get, every 2 minutes, I guess, you get a notification that the autosave failed.
It just stays there. It stays arranged and it doesn't move. It's sticky. So once it's there, it's just, hey, you will just never be able to write this file. It's not something that's distracting, that's popping, that's flashing. So
yeah, but I think Brian just proposed, checking on open, kind of adding a writable key to the model so that the UI knows that it's writable and can do things like disable autosave, disable, maybe show a dialog on explicit save or show a warning, notification, whatever we decide, but show some UI other than actually trying to save. There's actually trying to save the notebook and take a link.
Sure. If it's just the flag and seeing the UI later, I'm sure it's fine. If we start going into the UI now, we won't finish the meeting in time.
Yeah, we're talking about read-only notebooks, basically.
Yes, I've been working on that.
Yeah, I think it makes sense to add it to the model, and we can talk about that and the UI don't need to be the same PR.
So, well, I mean, so there's two aspects of the UI.
Mm-hmm.
There's preventative, and then sort of notification things. For example, I mean, the simplest thing to do is, well, let me change. The hard thing to do is disable all toolbar, menu item, keyboard shortcuts related to saving.
Yeah.
And that's a longer, more difficult discussion.
Mm-hmm.
The simple thing to do is just to add logic to the notebook.save method that looks at that model and basically doesn't save.
Just shows, instead of, basically behave the exact same way it does now, it's just instead of showing a notebook save failed thing after doing the whole serialization and network request, you show a similar notification that says save is disabled.
Well, I mean, except I wouldn't even try to.
So one question: what if you see that the notebook cannot be saved, and you say, "Oh, just SSH to the server, change the permission, and you cannot click the button anymore"?
Well, you just do a reload.
And then you lose all your change?
Well, I mean, the problem right now is that the current behavior is way more broken than any of that. and so I want to do something extremely simple that will not solve all of our problems, but that will improve the completely broken behavior today. I have a branch where I started to do this, and they're trivial changes. And like the change that I've made so far is that when someone clicks save, this notebook.save method, rather than actually trying to save the notebook, just puts a notification in the notification area that says read only.
Yeah, and like Matthias said, that has the disadvantage of causing data loss if the unnecessary data loss if the permission thing was a bug, like you did a sudo cp instead of a cp or something. It's like, oh crap, I don't own this file. Let me fix that.
Or you can add a dialog which is yes, I really want to try saving, and then it doesn't work.
No, and actually I should mention the other thing I do. I mean, is display that read-only notification when the notebook is loaded. So that
I think that's important.
That makes sense.
Tell the user that they won't be able to save.
Yeah.
I think a lot of like existing applications, if you open a file read-only, it's read-only until you like close it and open it again, right? Like you can't, even if you change the permissions while it's open, you can't save it.
Yeah, and I've seen a couple that put a little notification at the top that says you opened a file that you can't read.
Hello.
Hey,
Hey, John.
What about renames?
Like a save as.
oh Jesus.
I mean, the problem that I'm finding is that if you have a file that's read-only, it's very likely that the directory is also read-only.
I would not.
And right
Now,
now,
is read-only, then you don't actually lose data because with atomic save you will
and
have the temporary copies.
yeah, but because of this right now, if you try to rename in a read-only directory, because of atomic save, it's completely broken. Hold on, I'm not hearing anything.
That's because nobody's saying anything.
Oh, Thomas's lips were moving, just nothing.
I was just trying to think through, if you try to rename in a read-only directory, but if it's in a read-only directory, then nothing works anyway. I mean, you can't save it whether you rename it or not, right?
Well, but the question is, I mean, in the dashboard, we could add logic that looks at this model as well. But in the actual notebook page, if someone tries to do a rename and the notebook file is read-only, should we disallow the rename completely and just say, you know what? It's
I would.
You would?
Probably. I don't know. I mean, because rename will fail. May or may not. I don't know.
Well, rename is move essentially. So
Yeah.
if the file is read-only, you can't remove that file.
Yes, you can.
So, can you?
Yeah, you can. If you can. Removing files is a modification of the directory, not a modification of the file.
Yeah, no, it's a directory permission.
So
Not
you can delete read-only
If
files.
it's in a read-only directory, then you can't.
Yes, and those are separate permissions. But I don't know. I don't think that's a case.
Let's try not to focus too much on file system storage. Let's try to keep in mind Google Drives.
No, absolutely. And I've written the pull request in a way that is not just for file system-based stores. I mean, my idea of a read-only notebook is that
You can't modify it at all. It's like you can just run, and when
you can open it, you can run it, you just can't save anything you do. And I think
does your PR actually disable all the editing of the notebook document?
No, I mean you can. I mean, why disable that? I mean, you can play with it all you want. You're just not going to be able to save it.
Okay. So it's not read-only.
And maybe read-only. What's the right word for this?
Save is disabled.
What's that?
Unsavable. Should we have a? I mean, at the moment we have this rather odd thing for a desktop application of like rename and make a copy as actions when you have the file open. Why not implement the more traditional thing of save as?
I can't. Someone has an echo, and I
Yeah,
can't.
can someone mute Jason? The UI is all
Stop. Wow.
Nobody has the ability to mute Jason? I can just kick him out.
Okay.
Or actually, I probably can't. I don't have any UI for.
That seems better.
Yeah.
I don't know what I was saying now.
Yeah, so there's read-only.
We
Read-only is the wrong word to
implement
use.
save as rather than rename.
Yeah, but that's copy. Can someone mute Jason?
I thought I did.
Okay, maybe just the whole thing is.
No, I tried to, but it won't let me.
Okay. Okay, yeah, it's not surprising that Google Hangouts is all messed up. It's usually messed up.
No, I mean, in the long run, I think.
Can you open the? Yeah, can you open the repositories?
No, we have two Jasons.
Control Shift J.
Okay, so So the name of the model field right now is writable, and should the like when I display the message, should it just be not writable? Is that or not savable?
I would use more colloquial language, like you won't be able to save.
Okay. Okay. Well, I mean, I want to keep the initial version of this basically as simple as possible. I mean, I know in the long run, we might say, okay, well, the make a copy command allows someone to specify like a different directory, but that's a much bigger question. And
yeah, and that's just a UI question because the REST API does now support putting it anywhere. That didn't used to be the case, but with the contents service, you can write anywhere.
Yeah, I just don't.
It's just a UI. It's just a simple UI.
We'll put one of the UI monkeys.
It's not a technical problem. It's a UI problem.
Yeah. Okay, I think I've got enough information to put together a pull request.
Sure. Sounds good. Matthias, CodeMirror 4 issues?
Yes. So I need a way to tell the keyboard manager not to handle an event, and register event is not sufficient. So my proposition is to add a specific key exactly like CodeMirror does. So if you add a specific key, which is CodeMirror ignore, something register an event bubble up, CodeMirror see it, doesn't do anything, and let it go through. And I was proposing to have the same thing for Keyboard Manager. So if you have something that handles the events before Keyboard Manager, it can set something to the event which is juicy, and the Keyboard Manager would just don't.
So you basically need the ability to conditionally and sometimes handle have the Keyboard Manager not handle events.
Yes. Typically up and down arrow, because when the completer is there, you want up and down to select another item, but you don't want the selected cells to change, or the cursor in CodeMirror to move up and down.
So it's not enough to
prevent default or stop propagation don't work, because you have the original event and you have the jQuery event, and in the Keyboard Manager I even have to check event.original event and look at the key I'm adding to stop the propagation.
Yeah, I mean, this logic is extremely subtle. I mean, and it's part of where it's possible that, so the last work that touched the keyboard management stuff was when Paul fixed some things, and he did touch some of the interaction between the keyboard manager and CodeMirror, and it's possible that there's really subtle problems with that, and I mean it's not Paul's fault. This stuff is just horrible.
My take on that is that CodeMirror is doing something like that. They have a specific key, so it might be a good hint that it's something that could work, and it works. I mean, when you do it, it works nicely. I mean, at least until for what I have done. But otherwise, you will have to basically have the Keyboard Manager that has complete knowledge of all the CodeMirror instances and the completers, and vice versa, and it's just crazy.
Yeah, that's not that would be rough. So basically, so right now, when you're in edit mode and you're typing, does Keyboard Manager or CodeMirror get the event first?
CodeMirror.
Okay.
But it's even worse when you have the completer. Because when you have the completer, you have the completer that triggers event on CodeMirror and bubble up, and so you have 4 layers, and you really don't want to add another.
And so you're proposing that we start to add, basically that the event object that bubbles up through those layers, we set some flag on that the Keyboard Manager looks at to see if it should ignore that.
Yes. Right now, what I do is I look at the code mirror field, because I have to ignore at the same time at the keyboard manager layer and at the code mirror layer. So I have to tell to code mirror, when I press up and I am in the compiler, don't do anything. So I look at the same key, but my concern is maybe later we will want some action to bubble in code mirror and not in the keyboard manager,
Yeah.
or vice versa. So I would like to add another key, which is IPython specific.
I mean, I would just, I mean, I would use your intuition on this and see sort of what looks like the best design. I mean, this is really, it's subtle enough in my experience that you're just going to have to play with it, debug it. I mean, it's nasty, nasty logic. But I mean, I think what you're proposing sounds like a reasonable way, like adding flags to the event object to manage this logic. I think it makes sense.
In this PR, so you had a PR a while ago to kind of get rid of our custom completer and use the code mirror completer?
Yeah, I will have to rewrite everything from scratch because now it's code mirror 4.6 and.
Yeah, but I remember from that PR we needed to use code mirror 4 because of fixes.
Yep.
Would using code mirror completer rather than our own simplify some of this?
Using code mirror completer would need to redo a lot of code, and I'm not sure we'll have time before IPython 3.0 because I would like code mirror 4 to be in master pretty early to test already.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. So yeah, we can do. I'm just wondering if some of the event stuff is problematic because we have our custom completer, because I know that's always been that's been the case for a while, that it's because we have this element inside code mirror that's ours and not code mirrors.
But code mirror does not have complete as you type, and we will probably have to re-add some logic that gives the same problem when we had the as you type completer.
Yeah, but that doesn't affect focus issues, because focus issues only or event issues are mainly problematic when there's the extra element. And the fact that our completer shows up disabled by default because it's never focused, because if you focus, the events will be all wrong. Suggests that maybe hopefully we can kill our own completion.
So make it private for, like, provisional private for the time being.
Yeah, just if it's possible that like, is this still an issue without completion? Like if you're just typing?
No.
Okay, so it's just a problem with the completion. Okay, then I would, because we've been adding hacks and workarounds to make keyboard events work properly in our completer for a long time now.
Yeah.
I would try to get the simplest thing that seems to behave correctly, and then try to see if using in another PR, which may or may not be from you, try to use the code mirror's own completer UI and see if that eliminates the need for the fix, the workaround.
Sure.
Okay. Dropping the rel prefix on git tags. That seems fine to me.
Yeah, I'm in favor.
Fernando, I know Fernando has historically voiced support of the prefix.
Yeah, I'm guessing Fernando. I got an email from Fernando last night at 3 a.m. So.
Yeah, no, he told us that he's not going to make it today, but we might want to let him chime in on that. Nightly Conda builds with Travis? What? Travis? Wait, which Travis? Travis the continuous integration robot, or Travis, the guy who runs Conda? Human person.
Not the human person.
Okay.
No, so I'd like to figure out a way that we can have an easy way of installing IPython sort of daily dev with Conda. And
But why? I don't understand why Travis.
well, it's just something that we can have running in the back. I mean,
Like, I can run it in
Jenkins would be a much easier thing to do that on. I think, than
that's fine. I don't.
something that we have control over the VMs, because we've got machines that can, right? Like I could build. I mean, I already build nightlies of about 30 packages on my Mac.
I'm sure
I
Kyle
can
will
add
do
Conda packages to that. Easy enough.
Yeah, I mean that it doesn't. To me, it doesn't really matter how we build those. But the question
No, you
is,
just
go ahead.
use Docker run IPython notebook. It works.
You use what?
Docker.
Yeah.
Sorry, I missed that.
But the question is, do we want to start a repo on somewhere that has the Conda recipes for the packages?
Sure. Yeah, I guess just start like a nightly builds repo kind of thing.
If we do Conda, I would really like to also upload pre on PyPy. PyPI, whatever its name.
How many people actually do nightly development uploads to PyPI? Because I've seen a couple of people push like release candidates and betas,
yeah, I don't think it's
but
very common.
even that's quite rare.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Conda has the advantage that you can, I mean, we can create a bin star like IPython nightly channel.
Yeah. No, that's what I'm planning on. That's
Yeah.
my thought.
But I mean, yeah, it has the advantage that you can create a separate channel, whereas PyPI is effectively there is one channel unless you run your own PyPI server.
Yes. No, I think Conda is definitely a better solution.
I mean, speaking of PyPI server, like channels include, say, a directory full of wheels. And there, in fact, is a public directory full of wheels that includes nightly builds of IPython, hosted on the computer hosting this Hangout right now. But so that does already exist if you're okay with the pip find links thing.
What find links thing?
So pip can, there's the, I can't remember if it's like -F-K something, or in your pip config you can add URLs, which are either directories on your machine or URLs of any page on the internet. And you can say, pip, when I ask to install something, look for links here in addition to PyPI.
Ah, gotcha.
So that's how I can, when I do, pip install matplotlib, it actually looks at the wheels that I've built and finds that and doesn't get anything from PyPI.
Ah, and did you say you're already doing nightly builds of IPython?
Yeah, I'm doing nightly builds of, everything I use, basically. So IPython, SciPy, Matplotlib, Pandas, stats models, scikit-learn, deep-learn, just all the things.
Okay.
Adding, and, it's nightlies for, Python 3.4 and 2.7. And
Okay. No, I mean, I honestly, for the use case that I'm facing most immediately, that may suffice. But I still think having the Conda built would be.
Would you call it like a nightly build repo or like a Conda recipes?
Do you think we would want to add pip related things to that eventually? And
I think it makes sense to have a Conda recipe somewhere, because I mean that can be used not just for nightlies, but for building release Conda packages as well.
Yeah.
And, if we need scripts and things for automating nightly builds.
It's logically in the same repo.
Okay, so maybe IPython/nightly builds.
Sure.
Okay, and then a conda subdirectory.
Yeah,
And, you know,
I think the
can-
convention is conda recipes.
Okay.
And you know you can make the recipe. Like you can start the recipe by doing conda skeleton IPI IPython, and it captures the metadata and builds like a basic recipe for you. You can
Okay.
customize it from there.
Yeah, I mean they already exist.
Oh yeah, or you can start from the conda recipes.
Yeah, so there's a conda recipes repo on conda.
Right. No, I've seen those IPython.
And it has, IPython, IPython notebook, IPython Qt console, etc.
Yeah.
So it should be tiny tweaks to make it nightly appropriate, and presumably it. Yeah. Yes.
So it's worth saying that, like, I understand doing the Travis workflow for it. It's not nightly, but then you do have it immediately.
Yeah,
But then you have to embed the encrypted secrets within the Travis repo if you're gonna push the build out.
Yeah, you'd have
Yeah.
to do that.
plus, yeah, it already takes long enough to do the builds on pull requests and things. We don't want Travis trying to do still more on every commit.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think just doing it locally, I can.
Yeah, because you
Because
can
I
just
can.
your server there.
Yeah, with Jenkins we could even we can do Windows and everything.
So what should we use for the version number of these packages? Git describes?
No. So the version number should just be, IPython version, and then the build number you'll increment every time. So all the nightlies will have the same version, exactly the same version,
Ah, okay.
but the build number you increment. So it's not appropriate to put git info in the version, in the package version. It is appropriate to put it in the build version if you feel like it. If that's allowed, even. I don't know.
Can you guys call the phone number that we put in the getter through the Google Hangout? You should be able to add us that way.
Call phone numbers.
Yeah, I don't know how to. Hold on.
I've got no UI. All the UI is messed up. No, I can't do that. There's no UI for inviting a phone number.
Try typing
I
it
just-
and see what happens.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
I,
what happens when you...
No, it's
no,
not.
no, I can't do that. Anyway, moving on.
Sorry, guys.
For value.
Fernando is not there. Maybe we wait for him next time.
Yeah, I do. How do people feel about adding the value for?
I think we already had a discussion on the end. We didn't agree on the order of the four things. And,
You can already give it the starting value by giving it a default value. I think that's like the parameter. If the parameter in the function has a default value, that's used as the starting value for a slider. If I remember
Yeah.
rightly.
So there's already.
No, I think. Yeah, I think I probably. Yeah, if we go beyond one positional argument, I should say we should not go beyond one positional argument.
But we already support 3.
We do?
This is for the interact abbreviations. Like when you put a tuple.
I'm sorry, for the interact. Yeah. No, I So this is the widget abbreviation for sliders, right?
Yes, the interact abbreviation. It's specific to interact, I believe.
No, I mean, conceptually, I feel like that's what a default value is.
So it is something that so it's a question of whether you want, so it affects the use case where you're calling interact not as a decorator.
Yes.
So you don't have control over the signature.
Yeah, I think in that case it's
Because if you're using interact as a decorator, this is definitely not relevant at all.
If you want that level of control, I think it's fine to say you need to specify the full thing. Because I think as Matthias has commented, if you have a tuple of 4 things, you're never going to remember which one is which.
And you can import slider widget just as S, and then it's just one more keystroke. So I'm not sure it's really relevant to do long.
Yeah, although that's a bit more because you need everything's secret art, so it'd be S.
You guys can't hear us.
Yeah, we can now.
There, now you can't hear us.
Yeah, no, mute doesn't work. I can hear you.
Oh, okay, the mute doesn't work.
You have to actually stop talking.
Okay, never mind.
We were trying to meet you earlier and failed.
S could be something which does more matching depending on the number of arguments, right? You could have something which is not a tuple, which basically return an instance of something else.
Yeah, no, you can write your own
Right
abbreviations for whatever you want.
So I don't think it should be default.
Yeah, I think it's always unfortunately the trouble with defining an abbreviation syntax is people are always going to wish they could do one more thing with the abbreviation syntax.
Exactly. Well, and
everybody's going to disagree on whether the line for appropriate inclusion is on one side or the other of that.
Yeah. Well, and I think, if we make it min-max step value, someone's going to come along and say, well, I always use min-max value. It's ridiculous for me to have to specify the step every time.
Yeah.
And so I think sticking with the 3 we have is my preference.
Yeah.
Plus one from here. My experience with Sage was that once it got beyond about 3 arguments, it was just terrible. I could never remember what was going on.
Yeah, that's why I'm adding all my JavaScript stuff. I'm making the arguments just take like an options dictionary because more than 2 positional arguments. Basically, no function should take more than 2 or at most 3 positional arguments.
Absolutely.
Under any circumstance. Okay. MB format stuff. So, everybody, in the beginning, there was a question of do
we want to use XML?
Well, okay, that was a question. We answered that question. The answer is no.
Wait a second, I gotta lace on my boxing gloves here.
RDF.
So, in the beginning, we asked the question: do we want one file, or do we want multiple files / one file that's actually a zipped up directory? Basically, we want outputs separate from inputs. And the structure of the notebook document, outputs is separate files than from inputs.
But more than outputs and state.
No, state has never been.
This was like in the beginning.
In the beginning.
In the beginning. Yeah. Okay, fine.
Yeah, in the beginning. We're still talking about in the beginning. In the beginning, there was this question of do we want outputs, do you want just one simple flat file, or do we want to split outputs into one or more kind of resource files? And the decision was, given the notebook structure and the structure of input and output in the notebook document, it was the benefits of a simple single file that has a straightforward structure was greater than, you know, it was better to have one file with its simple structure that has everything than it was to have multiple files that you have to manage separately.
Yeah. Or a zip file.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean.
And now, and that was predicated on the simple, consistent structure of output.
I don't agree with that second part. I feel like it was more a question of we want a single file and we don't want it to be .zip. And
well, but there's a cost. So there's a cost to including output in the file. And right now that the main cost is, you know, base 64 encoded binary data, which increases the file size of the notebook document unnecessarily. So, you know, there are costs to a single file.
Plus, there are a lot of people who want to store the input part of notebooks in version control and not the output part, and that, you know, storing them together in one file makes that somewhat awkward.
Yeah, and I think with the unordered nature of when thinking about widget models, which have this many-to-many relationship, are unordered and UUID identified.
Yep.
I think the balance of does it make sense to put this in the file or not is like that question. The relevant information for that in that decision has changed wildly with the addition of widget state.
I agree with that.
Because they're completely horrendous in the notebook document because it's an unordered collection of. It basically takes outputs and then makes them just an unordered collection at the end of the file, rather than keeping the simple structure.
Yep.
So the question is, do we want to revisit the question of outputs in general being in a separate file and widgets being kind of a first-class member of that? Or do we want to go kind of in between and say it's really it's mainly widgets that have this problem, and kind of this runtime state, which is what widgets have and outputs don't, and maybe only that goes in a separate file. And what do we want to do about NB format 4 in terms of this kind of stuff?
Yeah, given that, especially if we're going to move more stuff to a separate file, I think it will take longer to design that than something we want to put into IPython 3, in which case, do we still try and do the NB format 4 changes that we've already got for IPython 3, knowing that we may want to break it again to do those changes? Do we do those and kind of try to ensure that as far as possible the later changes don't require a backwards incompatible change to the notebook format, which maybe isn't impossible, but we don't really know until we've designed it? Or do we want to leave the NB format 4 until we've worked this out, in which case it's probably going to miss IPython 3.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it'll be on IPython 4, which makes sense, I guess.
I mean, I think...
No, we go directly to 5, like Microsoft.
No, we just jump to 11, right? Next IPython is IPython 11.
We'll beat all of them to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, My feeling is that the unification of widgets and output from not from the notebook file format, but from the UI and the Python side of things is going to make it very difficult to treat outputs and widgets differently in the file format. I think they will have some differences, but I think those differences are going to be blurred sufficiently that it's going to be pretty difficult to try to,
But outputs will never have models, right?
There is one thing. We need server persistency of the model even if it's not on file system. So my take on that is that at some point we will have to store the model of the notebook on the server so that you can just close your window and reopen. And once we have that, defining the files that go on disk will be much more easier than trying to do the other way around. So I would first, like, we can have like an in-memory completely that change at every commit implementation of this thing, so that you can close your window and reopen it, or have maybe, I don't know, live collaboration at some point in the future.
Need the models stored on the server for that. You could store them in the kernel and resend them.
Mm-hmm. You want the kernel to know about the notebook structure?
Not about the notebook structure, but about the widget models, which it
already does know.
It already knows about the widget models.
Yeah, but you will need something to have persistency on the server, so it makes sense to have persistency on the server, and after once you have that, you can mess with it as much as you want because it's just an implementation details that change every time the server restarts. And then when you have that's stabilized, you can wonder whether or not you want to persist on disk and how.
What if? This is a possibility. We could. Well, so the issue, Min, that I see is that, if we allow multiple separate output areas that can be treated like widgets and nested in a widget hierarchy, I just don't know how to separate out output from widgets in a clean way.
Well, like if you had an output, if you added an output type that was an output area, that gives you arbitrarily nested outputs by adding one output.
I think we have a bit shifted from the original question when Min asked about the separation of outputs and inputs in separate files. Even before you do that, there should be, even at the notebook level, not only at the cell level, a separation between generated data and input data. Like kernel spec is mostly input, I would say, and the model states, if they are saved in the notebook metadata, should fall into generated metadata. So, the other example that we had,
if you move a slider, then that's not generated. The value of that slider is input.
So sorry, which is, I didn't hear you well. Could you say that
again? I don't think that distinction is something that really makes sense, because if I drag a slider, then that seems to me like input state. But if that slider starts moving itself, then that's generated state. And
no. Actually, we had this discussion already on the link widget thread with the data store, right? So I think I would say that any state of a widget is forced into the output, because the key, the widget model ID is regenerated every time you run the notebook. So to me, any widget state is an output, right?
But in Python state's not an output. Only displayed Python state is an output.
Can you hear that? The Python state. The Python state
kernel
is an
state
output?
isn't an output. Kernel state isn't an output. Only displayed kernel state is an output.
Yeah.
And that's why there's something blurry between models. Models are in between kernel state and displayed. Like they cross this weird.
Yeah.
They live in a. It's not even that they're in between. It's that they are on. They span output and just runtime state.
So what did you think of the proposal of using the store? Like, when you remember that example, like short snippet I put in the Gitter, and then the link widget example?
I have if kind of runtime state is stored in a separate file that kind of under normal circumstances is not tracked in version control, that kind of thing. That it's a runtime side effect file that isn't, so that basically that information never gets written to the notebook file. I have less of a problem persisting
whatever, right?
Kind of, greedily persisting model state to that, because there aren't the consequences of doing that that there are in persisting it to the notebook file itself.
And really, if you have that solution, it's one more click to throw it into the metadata and make a fat notebook, so you have a single file that contains snapshots of state, say, bookmarks of settings on the widgets, etc. But typically, you wouldn't have these fat files. But you could make it possible to have a fat file, a fat IPYNB file that NB-convert would know what to do with.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know. I'm not putting this forward as like I've figured it out. It's
right. As far as
if anything, I've figured out. Thinking about this means I figured out less than before, because
I think
now there are even more open questions than there used to be.
So I put this on the agenda not so much as a decide what to do about it, as a if we want to seriously think about this, what do we do about NB format 4? Because we're not going to finish this discussion in time for IPython 3.
What's IPython 3's target date?
Yeah,
fuzzy, but
vaguely soonish. I mean,
we're kind of saying sometime
the main milestones for IPython 3 were NB format 4 and widget persistence.
Yeah, so it's all this.
So if we're holding both of those, but at the same time, we've done a bunch of stuff. We've done a bunch of stuff in IPython. But yeah, the multi-language stuff. So it might be worth. It might make perfect sense to say, we haven't figured this out. Let's hold it and then do our nice, focus on multi-language support.
Yeah.
Leave all the IPython and Python specific stuff in the notebook format that we have, because that's one of the reasons for NB format 4 is fixing Python specific stuff.
Yeah.
But it's really message spec. The message spec changes are more important to that than the.
I think
format ones.
I think I would prefer to focus on not implementation questions, but the user side of things, and basically what features do we want related to widget persistence, interleaving of output and widgets for users? Like what actual features do we want to support? And let's make a decision on that, and then decide, okay, how do we implement that? And because part of what I feel like
matters, right? Like we can come up with a feature we want, and then we realize that we can't implement it in a satisfactory way. Then it makes sense to change what features we want.
Well, but I think once you decide on a feature and everyone agrees, yes, we're moving forward with this.
But if the implementation costs are unacceptable, then they're unacceptable. I mean,
no, but again, I think
we've got hundreds of issues marked as wish list that we all agree we should do, and we don't, because for a variety of reasons.
Yeah, but I think
we're all the sort of people who, when we discuss features, we'll all be thinking about how they're going to work. We can't move away from implementation.
And I'm trying to push back on our tendency to focus on implementation. I know we will always do that. We're software engineers. We build this stuff. We maintain it. We will always think about that. But I feel like what do we actually want to offer? Like, do we want widget persistence? Because
of course we want widget persistence. We want ponies.
No.
We have
Brian,
to
what's your
implementation? I don't think it's remotely practical to to say, let's decide what we want and then go and implement it. Because
No, I mean, it's a simple question. If we want, or I mean, I'm not even going to phrase it as a question, a statement. If we want widget persistence in IPython 3, then we just have to figure this stuff out. Regardless of the decision we make, we have to figure it out. And I'd rather us focus on that question.
But, you know, it's, as we've found, it's difficult and we have lots of disagreements on how to do it. And one sort of proposition that's served us quite well over the years is that if we're having disagreements over how to do something, then we should probably spend longer thinking about it.
Absolutely. But I
don't think it's sensible to divorce this issue from the implementation because, I mean, it's not just a question of whether we want it for IPython 3, it's a question of can we do it for IPython 3? And, you know, if ultimately, if it comes down to it, like, does it make sense to hold up IPython 3 with the other new features that we've already got while we work this issue out?
And I guess,
my personal thought is we should wait until we get the widget persistence stuff worked out. I'm sorry. I think we should get IPython 3 out sooner and let widget persistence settle because I don't know. From an aside, it's been discussed long enough that we may not get something we're comfortable with that we then have to support later.
Yeah. But Min, are you okay with not having the NB format 4 in version 3?
There are a couple of message spec changes in there that I'll have to pull out, but that's fine. I mean, I've been, you know, it's the third release in a row that NB format punted, but there's a reason every time, and NB format, like the format, every time the format that I would have done it's better every time. I mean, the rebase is going to be a nightmare, but whatever. It's not that it's a biggish PR, but it's honestly not very complicated.
Yeah,
it's mainly decisions to make. It's not the changing NB format is not a difficult technical problem. It's the deciding what the hell it should be is the hard part.
We'll take
so
it
I'd be disappointed to see it miss yet another release.
Yeah, no, I would too.
We have to pause for a minute or two. Just FYI, we have to go find somewhere else to be.
Okay, no problem.
We're on our built-in microphone now.
I'm not confident that we can, right? Because part of the point of NB format 4 is not changing it. Is, you know, it's an accumulation of all the things we wanted to fix for the last 2 years now. And part of the point is making the transition so that we no longer need to fix that stuff. And then we can let that version sit for hopefully at least 2 years. I'm not at all confident that we could have a spec for widgets in the file format that we could keep for that long. And I think that's a criterion for getting widgets in the file format.
That it's something we can really...
something that we are confident we're not going to change for years. Yeah. That doesn't mean that we're right about not changing it for years, but we at least are confident that we will.
That we won't, yeah.
I don't think there's any evidence that we can do that. Yeah. And so if we do something, there's a middle ground that there's something weird we could do where persisting widgets is not actually widgets in the notebook format, but if widgets are kind of runtime state as a separate thing.
But you still have to put something in the notebook, right?
No, as in, like, if you reload the page, then
it does two things. Like you get the notebook, and then you get here's the state file, and the state file is something totally different.
But don't you still have to put references in the notebook that point to that state?
Not technically, right? I mean, you could do the
widgets can say, this widget has a view in the output of cell number 4.
Right.
Rebuild
obviously, it would be better. Like the right way to do it is to have the notebook format aware of it. But you could do a tacked-on version where the widgets are a separate thing that needs to figure out how to make it work with the notebook format as it is. And I'm not saying that's what we should do. I'm just saying
I see that.
Technically, we could do widgets as a kind of widget persistence as something that's not a notebook file feature, but as like load as another action for load the notebook document, and then load kind of UI state as a distinct operation.
Yeah. No, I mean that would be sufficient for widget persistence, but not for interleaving of widgets and output.
Right. Yeah, and addressable stuff.
Yeah.
Some of that we might be able to address in kind of minor revision stuff. I do think we want to, as a part of IPython 3, kind of do things like define behavior for unrecognized output, define behavior for unrecognized cell types, so that we don't have to do major revision changes just to say, oh, there's a new output type.
So make your format future compatible?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think some of that's a good idea.
And then you could maybe, and then if it's possible, we could figure out a way to do, widget output as an output type that includes the references, and then it's not impossible that we could get widgets in the notebook format in a minor revision.
So I have in my mind, the original proposal that John and I came up with, or some variant of it, is totally doable from an implementation perspective. There's no technical problems with it. It would work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just implementation and design problems.
And I guess what I'm trying to understand is in my mind, the notebook is a big JSON blob, and it's basically a JSON database. And
yeah, but it's not an unordered collection of.
But it doesn't. I feel like that's.
And it's not runtime state. Like you're adding something really different.
Okay, so it's the abstraction breaking that and this is what I'm trying to understand.
Yeah, you're adding things that aren't part of the document. So there's.
Well, but the widget, like when I look at it.
It's one of those that there's the continuum of like the UI, the visual representation of the thing. You could consider part of the document. But that doesn't necessarily include, all the state information and the place. Its place in the thing, like its physical location, is part of that information. The model ID doesn't have to be part of the document. And models that aren't displayed obviously aren't part of the document.
Yeah. So it's
far enough down that route with things like the proposed link widget, then you effectively end up with a framework for building JavaScript applications without writing JavaScript, and then serializing like the object graph of those applications, that you can reconstruct an interactive application from an untrusted file, which is kind of crazy.
So this is where I would
project type thing.
No, and this is where I would say absolutely, that's what we want.
And I would say absolutely. I don't want us to be responsible for that.
We've already built that.
Feature I think we should not have.
Yeah, I think what I mean, that is what we have already built.
Not the serialization and
I understand,
reconstruction part.
but in terms of the things that are possible with widgets today, basically it's that.
But I'm specifically saying like the serializing an application so that you can run an interactive application from an untrusted file. That's
well, but I don't think
that code from that file, a declarative file that can reconstruct an application. That's not what we do, and that's specifically something that that's kind of like research project and interactive computing type thing, and I don't think that should go straight into IPython and straight into our notebook format specification.
I think I think from the user's perspective, a notebook document is an interactive application, and we want it to be portable. Like I want to have it on my machine and give it to you, and you see it.
Yeah, from a user's perspective, absolutely, I want that. But again, for developers, we have to think about the implementation. And
so,
I know of an existing project that does
security
that.
in the untrusted notebook. Isn't it a bit separated from the argument about the notebook format? I mean, if we try to just take subjects one by one, for example. So regarding the notebook format, what you don't like about the persistent widgets is that models are global and not attached to a SAR. Yes. So on that, I would probably say that there are other things than models, that widget models, that should probably not be attached to a SAR, like STDR and things like this. When, for example, you have some standard error that comes from a widget model at runtime, you may want this to be printed elsewhere than in a given SAR. So, and we have this happening all the time, and where the event originated is usually not really linked to any SAR. So currently, all this standard error goes to dev null, and it essentially, I mean, not really dev null, but it really, I mean, disappears.
Yeah, it gets to the widgets handler, and the widget makes the choice to discard it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But I think I disagree. I want to clarify. In my mind, abstraction breaking is not an implementation question. It's a question of abstractions. And so my understanding of what Min was saying is that his objection to this is that it's abstraction breaking. And that to me is very different from implementation. Now maybe you say that the implementation is abstraction breaking, but the important thing is the abstractions. And to me, the abstractions that we are already offering to our users is basically documents with arbitrary applications that are dynamic. And so,
okay, the thing is that an application and the state of this application is not related to the document. And when there are errors in this application, these errors are not directly necessarily linked to a SAR, and they should fall somewhere. And this really speaks for a notebook level output, which is acknowledging that there is also an application and not just a document. And right.
And I think, I mean, I think it's very important to not break abstractions without considering that very much. And I
think when we introduced the widget framework, we did exactly that.
Yeah, we dramatically obliterated our abstractions.
No, and we were walking into a dark room. We really were. And I think I'm not thrilled about postponing the notebook format changes, but I think it's important that we get the abstractions right. I don't care about the implementation details as much. The abstraction details are the really important things. And so, I mean, if that means postponing all of this and just getting 3.0 out sooner, I'm fine with that. but in my mind here, again, it's not implementation questions, it's abstraction questions. What is the notebook document? And so, but I don't know. I mean, I agree with you, Thomas.
Yeah, and that's something we fundamentally disagree on what a notebook document is.
Absolutely, and I agree with you, Thomas, that the way that we handle this traditionally is we just wait, and I like that approach in general. So.
Well, we don't just wait. We wait and
argue on a weekly basis. Yeah,
exactly. No, absolutely, and I don't think we should break that tradition.
I mean, in terms of feature, you probably really want the notebook to be used to embed data visualization, and in the kind of data visualization tools that we've built, it's extremely nested, and every single item on the chart is going to be its own widget in the sense of X object, like some synchronized object. Not all of them have a visual element linked to it, and we have really moved towards having very thick models for very thin views everywhere. And we really fall into, I mean, persisting these charts really forces us, really requires having the model states persisting at the notebook level. So that's why I'm really trying to convince everyone that that's the way to go. But,
So when you, this is an important point. So the way that you're using widgets, you tend to have largish models that you attach multiple thin views to different ways. Is that?
Yeah. But these objects, which are these widgets, are things like scales for a figure that might be used in different figures, and don't really correspond to a graphical element. They are just same object everywhere, and most of the logic is implemented in the JavaScript, in the model, for example. So this scale is an object that transforms, a data domain into a range corresponding like to pixels, for example.
Okay.
And that range depends on the views on the figure where you are, and the domain depends on the data, so it lies in the model. Things like this. So very, very often we have custom methods and logic implemented on the model.
Okay.
So models are effectively application components rather than models.
So the thing is, in your argument against using models like the current widget framework for doing a link widget, one of your arguments, Thomas, was that a thing like a button didn't have any state, and we just use the models and the widget infrastructure as a convenience to instantiate that object. But I mean, I don't see the harm in being multi-paradigm and having some things which are stateful, some things which are eventful, and some others which are both, right? So
sure, I mean,
for the link and the button,
if you want to do that, that's fine. I was trying to push back on, like, we designed the widget framework in IPython for a specific thing of having like models that have state, which is synchronized between kernel and front end, and then views on those models. It wasn't designed as this generic application framework. So I was trying to push back on like formalizing a generic application framework inside IPython and then having to deal with like serialization of that and everything, because that's really an order of magnitude more complicated than what the widget framework was intended for.
Well, but I mean, for example, in my experience, when you start developing, I mean, let's say you buy into this vision that it's just for models that have views like widgets, not a full-blown application framework, such as like the leaflet widget or 3JS that I developed. And you could say, well, there should just be one widget that is leaflet.js widget. And what you realize is you start to develop that widget that you inevitably start to deal with one-to-one and one-to-many and many-to-many relationships inside your widget. And you start to basically reinvent the entire widget framework within your widget if you try to do it that way. And you quickly realize, oh, wait, it's exactly. Just easier to make everything widgets.
Okay, so maybe maybe
then,
the result is that we designed the widget framework hugely oversimplistically. We got the abstraction completely wrong, and we need to pretty much redesign it.
No, I think it needs minor tweaks. This stuff already works. I mean, the Leaflet.js widget and the Three.js widgets, you can have incredibly complex hierarchies of widgets that carry data and some have views, some don't have views, and it magically works. Like, it's incredible.
You can also send IP over homing pigeons, but it wasn't what IP was designed for.
But I just don't understand why we'd say it works already. It's fantastic.
Well, because the serialization part, the part that we're discussing, does not work already.
No.
And that is hugely harder if it
works in a PR.
Yeah, I've been using this PR, it works.
Yeah, so I mean, from the get-go, I wanted to create something that would allow widgets as complicated as a full-blown spreadsheet. Like, I mean, I have always viewed that. Now, whether or not we build that spreadsheet is a different question, but I at least want it to be possible for someone to build something like that.
But a spreadsheet is something that you could implement as, you have a spreadsheet model and a spreadsheet view.
But no, the second you start to do it, you realize, oh crap, you need to start to synchronize separately the states of all the cells, and you have to reinvent the widget framework inside of your widget in a way that is just horrifically awkward, and so I don't know, I feel very strongly that this is within scope. And the widget framework already does this. Like, it's not a question. I mean, the serialization part is not done, but in terms of having hierarchies of complex widgets where some have views and some don't, like, it works. I mean,
it works, but I mean, it's if you look at how the implementation of the widget thing, that's very clearly not what it was designed for.
I just don't agree.
I don't like that either.
When I saw the design, I thought it was designed for exactly that sort of thing. That's why I started working in that Three.js widget.
No, I mean,
in fact, a lot of the design and rewrite that we did of the widget hierarchy was specifically because I was doing the Three.js framework and realized, I need this. Oh, I need this. Oh, this is a much better way to think about it. So I think very much the widget framework, at least the redesign
the widget framework has already had just catastrophic scope creep. Like, that has already happened.
but
a lot of
design.
I need to design a really complicated widget here.
I'm not joking about catastrophic. Like, because it's at the point where I strongly think that widgets needs to be its own project.
Oh, absolutely. No.
And widgets talking to the file format is a really important part of that. Because widgets need to evolve on their own in ways that do not change the file format.
Absolutely.
In dramatic, backward incompatible ways.
Yep. That's for sure.
Which means that whatever they do to
But when you design this file format, you're devising an API for other people to build upon it. And if you make it so that we can build what we want with it, it's going to encourage better practices among people building widgets.
So what you're saying is one way to take what you're saying is that we need to have a file format that's generic enough that people can basically write entire applications and use and insert whatever they need in the file format. I mean, right now the widgets in the output are it's hard to have the file format without some sort of representation of widgets. That's in the end you see some effect of the widgets that you're doing.
I mean, I think that the natural progression there would just be to say cells are models, input cells are models, everything is a model, and the notebook document is just a bunch of models.
You know what this sounds like? This sounds like the first version of the notebook I wrote, where the notebook itself was actually a database.
A database.
And it would work so much for what you want, that model is much better than what we have.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
You could query it, you could search it, you could build notebooks could be views of other subsets of notebooks. It was very powerful, much more powerful than what we have now.
It was, absolutely. It was awesome.
There was just no sensible UI for it.
I think you scrapped because
I think nobody cared, and there was no UI is the main the main thing in the notebook is UI.
In terms of the user's perspective.
Yeah. And the UI I had there was ridiculous.
Well, and also none of the technologies that we use today for the
WebSockets didn't exist.
Yeah.
Q didn't exist.
Yeah. It was a
IPython wasn't a relatively well organized multi-component thing.
Oh yeah.
There are lots of reasons why that one didn't take off, but the one feature of it with the database structure made this kind of thing. But yeah, I don't. So for instance, like changing the structure of int slider widget's persistence, is that a backward incompatible NB format change? Because these are things we need to think about when, like, why not? If you change stream output, that's a backward incompatible NB format change.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean,
like these are all like what does changing the persistence of a single widget, what does that mean?
Yes.
Like it is because for all our other outputs, the structure of that output is part of the notebook format.
Yeah.
And so if you have an int slider widget that you wrote in a newer version of IPython, and an int slider widget that you wrote, and you load that in an older version of IPython, and those write the same notebook format.
Yep.
If the model for the widget changed, that's basically breaking, like, if the model for that widget changed, then the notebook format, like, if the notebook format doesn't change with that change, like, that's a backward incompatible change in the notebook format.
Yeah, and actually,
clearly you can't fixate the model design in the notebook format because there's tons of models and widgets and things like that that you don't know about that people are designing or putting up.
I know, but this is something we need to we have to answer that question.
Yes.
Like we have to, and so if you have a model type or that where the model type exists across multiple versions and they're not compatible, like we have to have defined behavior for that.
Yeah. No, I mean,
and that has to be defined in IPython 3. That has to, or in, if IPython 3 has the notebook format, that has to be defined before we release the version that changing that breaks.
Yeah. No, and another putting it another way, if we had persistence when we first came out with the widgets, we could not change the widget models without updating the notebook format.
And I'm not sure that's sustainable given the state of widgets.
No, I agree, and I
for sure me, that's not sustainable.
Yes, no, sorry, I said that wrong. I'm quite sure that's not sustainable.
No, and so from my perspective, that argument right there is the best reason for us to wait. Wait on both widget persistence and on NB format 4, because I feel like part of the pain of updating the notebook format is just this, right? We don't have a good way of allowing individual, quote, models, whether that be a full cell or the input part of a notebook or widgets, basically data, to evolve separately. Right now we're doing it as this monolithic whole, and I don't know. It feels very unsustainable, and that we have some abstraction wrong. And so I think waiting.
Yeah, I mean the notebook format right now is a document format, and adding models to it means you're changing it from a document format to an application format.
Yeah.
There are a lot of things are just completely fundamentally different about that.
Yeah.
You should get rid of like all ordering, just make it one big UUID blob that changes every time, and then the only ordered structure is, like it's all by reference.
Yeah.
There are massive disadvantages to that that currently we're only talking about affecting widgets with, because widgets need things that make those disadvantages unavoidable. But if you want the whole thing to be consistent, then you got to apply that unpleasantness to everything.
Yeah. No, and
so even if we
go ahead.
Even if we postpone the persistence, I think that allowing for widgets to not really be widgets in the graphical sense, but application components can still be on the table, like things like the link. Because, I mean, as soon as
it's absolutely allowed. I don't want to introduce
I think the link should be, like, I don't think the link is something that should be forbidden to exist. I think it's something that should be excluded from IPython.
So Sylvan, I mean, it's my understanding you guys are already doing this, right?
Yeah, a lot.
And what did you have to make changes to IPython itself to implement this?
No, but in putting in IPython one widget that would have these features of being viewless, having an overloaded model, and also not using, I mean, being different in many ways to the other ones, we are somehow ensuring that you will still support this kind of thing in the future. And I think it's very natural.
Okay.
And in a way, I mean, as soon as Min opened his pull request with the the com messages, I and Chakri, who is not here right now, started building widgets. And the first ones that we built were a bar chart and a line chart that we could edit by drawing with the mouse. And from the start, we had to implement, components that were not visible. I mean, this comes very, very soon in the design of a plotting library.
Yeah.
In my opinion. So.
Yeah.
It's I allow for this.
But so the basic idea is that you can do this today. You just want to make sure that it continues to work and is taken into account in future developments.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So there's no. You're not proposing that we make some change to make this work, but that we just keep it in mind.
Yeah.
Okay.
And in particular, I think I don't know if I agree with Sylvan, but in particular, it seems like the thing that we want to make sure we keep is that we can have widget models, different widget models.
That don't have views.
Whether or not they have views, but they're different from the default widget model.
In the JavaScript side.
In the JavaScript side.
I think the JavaScript link widget isn't useful in IPython right now, but if and when we merge persistence, then it might be something that...
It's useful. It's useful in that it cuts down the latency quite a bit. If you have two sliders that are linked together, or there is a little bit of latency that's cut down when you make this linking on the JavaScript side instead of the Python side.
But if you actually have two sliders, then they can share a model. And this is also part of my objection. I feel like if you really want two things to have the same value, that should be done by them referring to a common value, not by a sync thing that pushes the values backwards and forwards.
But we made the decision that one model is linked to one view, so you cannot do that.
We can have actually
we can link both things to a separate value, but then that involves a separate sort of data store widget.
Exactly.
Value. And so either way,
data store widget is I think model. Surely that's the point of models, isn't it?
It is, but I think if you don't want a link widget to link two sliders, then you need a separate data model that has no view. Like you can't escape this.
This is already like we have the model view abstraction so that you can have two sliders referring to the same value. What I'm suggesting is that maybe we need to abstract that separation more so that you can have like a slider and a text box referring to the same model value.
That would be
we do this kind of stuff all the time.
Pushes values between them.
Yeah.
We do this kind of stuff all the time, but at some point, for example, you may want to link a multiple choice like toggle buttons value with, for example, which one of the interactions you may have on your chart, like for example, pan, zoom, zoom box, and it doesn't really make sense to devise a very special toggle button that would, as the model has the same one as the one of the choice of the interaction in the chart, right? You just want to link them because they are not the same thing.
At that point, what you'd want to do is write some JavaScript code that listens for events, but
no, because people will pull the chart from the Python side and link the toggle buttons with the interaction that they want. They don't want to devise a new widget for that.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think
I'm not casting a vote in favor of merging the JavaScript link widget. I think it would be nice to have it in core, but I'm perfectly fine maintaining it outside of core. But I think it would be useful to other IPython users, and it's an extremely useful example of when it might make sense to have a separate model from the default model, which is an example you don't have. The point here is that once you have an example, 2 examples of widget models, then it becomes much easier to sort of generalize and understand how to generalize.
But I give up. I'm not going to argue about this anymore.
Yeah, and again, if you guys vote against it, no sweat off my back. In some sense, I'll just maintain it outside of core. It provides a valuable, useful, low latency solution for us.
Yeah. No, but the thing that I wanted to clarify is that there's no modifications to IPython that we need to make for you to do that outside of core, right? That's the important thing.
That's right. And we'll put up a big fight if you break something.
Oh, no, absolutely.
That does something, and I'm fine just sort of saving that sort of fight for when it actually happens instead of preemptively merging something that constrains you.
No, obviously our general approach is when we say we're not going to do something, we're open to putting extension points in to enable other people to do what they want.
Right.
And I think that applies here.
Yeah, so with the widget stuff, part of the point of the widget stuff is that it's an extremely confined, small amount of functionality that enables you to build we will the default answer for any new functionality in widgets is no.
Yeah.
And you have to argue, you have to make the case for why, not just that this is useful to other IPython users, because the solution to that needs to be we need to solve the installation problem for third-party widget stuff.
Yeah.
Not the answer for this is generally useful doesn't mean that doesn't mean it should be in IPython. That means it should be installable and usable by other people.
Yeah.
And if you can't make something installable and usable by other people that's not part of IPython, that's something we need to fix.
Yeah.
So I really see the widgets and an API, not so much as a set of widgets.
Yeah, exactly. But that's because the easier it is to do things without them being part of IPython makes it easier for us to keep IPython something that's maintainable.
Yep.
So that's why we have a motivation to making it easier for you to make things without having to make them in IPython.
Yeah. So I think we're getting towards the end of the meeting. My preference is to postpone the merging of the NB format 4 and move forward more quickly with 3.0 without widget persistence and that. Thomas and Min, what is your read on this?
That seems sensible to me.
Yeah, probably. I'll probably pull out the validation. So I think I'll take so I made a bunch from the stuff gested with validation. The validation in the NB format 4 is a lot better than it is previously.
Okay.
So I will.
You may put that in.
So I'll take that. I'll take some of the APIs from from V4, some validation and composition stuff, and put that in master.
Okay.
Which will even shrink the V4 PR further.
Okay, and then the only other question there is heading cells. For 3.0, can we leave heading cells in the format, but just remove the UI for them? And basically start to convert them to markdown cells?
I don't know if I would. I don't know.
I mean, NB format 4 does that conversion, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it would be good if we could make the UI changes for that.
Okay.
Separate from the notebook document changes.
Yeah, I don't see any reason why we can't do that.
You can call it a deprecation, of course, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh yeah, the UI will. I mean, we'll handle it that way. Okay. Yeah, and then we just need to keep hammering on this stuff. I mean, it's going to be a longer discussion, and probably need to get people in the same room and work through this stuff because it's really complicated. It really is.
Yeah.
So, all right. Any other things? Last things on the agenda? Let's see.
The blocking with the.
I had to ask, I know that we're running up against the end of the.
I'm going to head out.
Okay, bye, Kyle.
Bye.
So I sort of had two questions. One is like a specific one, and one is a broader question. The first one is just for the PR for the undeletable cells, which is 6488. It was Brian. You added the needs decision tag back, and then Matthias removed it, and so I don't know what like the current consensus is on that PR. It says the tests are failing, but they're actually not. It was like a.
So no, we at one of our decision meetings, I think last week, we basically decided that we were in favor of it, but that the PR shouldn't have any UI, but the attributes for other aspects of it, and so I felt like, well, like we probably need to revisit it.
Okay, yeah. So I removed the UI stuff from it. So it's now just the functionality. The thing that I added was just that in addition to preventing like the literal deletion of cells, it prevents merging and splitting of cells that are marked as undeletable. And the motivation for doing that was that depending on how you are merging the cells, it will actually cause the cell to be deleted. The metadata that it had would be deleted, and I don't think we want to go down a rabbit hole of like trying to merge the metadata of two cells. So it's probably just easier to prevent merging, and then if you're preventing merging, you should also prevent splitting because you don't want to have to you don't want to be in a situation where you split it and then you realize you didn't want to do that, but now you can't merge it back because.
Okay, and does is the only new metadata field still just the undeletable one?
Yeah, so there's not anything different in the metadata itself.
Okay. I was confused then. I thought at one point there was actually separate metadata fields for merging and splitting as well.
No, yeah, I think that the discussion on the pull request got pretty long, so it's kind of confusing. But.
Okay, sorry. I don't know, any comments about this?
No, I think that's. I can imagine someone getting confused by the merge and split being affected by delete, but since merge and split imply some amount of deletion.
Yeah.
I don't know. It doesn't seem quite obvious to me what the right thing to do is, but what it does seems logical.
Yeah, I think that's a good. I mean, I think it's a reasonable place to start by preventing merging and splitting, and just see how it goes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, and then my second question, which we could decide to push this to next week if we wanted to, is sort of just about the UI in general. So both actually for the locking cells, and I had another pull request which was like handling the UI when the kernel doesn't start, like when the kernel's missing. And those sort of tie into this larger question of how do we want to present these types of things to the user. Like, so Thomas is very like against having the modal dialogues, and I think, yeah, like we don't want to have too many of those because then people will just start ignoring them and clicking through them and not reading the messages. But on the other hand, if you just have something up in the notification area, it's not really obvious like what's going on. And so you can have things like where, okay, if someone tries to run a cell, if there's no kernel, it alerts them, or they try to delete the cell and it's undeletable, it alerts them. But there's sort of like these 3 different options of doing it, and I think this is going to come up more in the future too. So.
Yeah. No, I totally see that, and I mean, there's a lot of cases where a modal really doesn't make sense. It's too disruptive, and people will just ignore it. But then the notification area, I mean, it's possible that we just need to improve the notification area slightly to maybe allow.
There's something about the dead kernel that makes the modal. So we have a modal dialog now when the kernel dies, but then once you dismiss it, the UI no longer expresses the fact that execution doesn't work.
Right.
Well, it does say kernel dead, but it otherwise doesn't express it yet.
In both of these cases, the interaction is you're trying to do something that you can't do.
Yeah.
And I think we just need a clearer way of expressing. It should be obvious before you try to do the thing that you can't do that thing, rather than like letting the person try and then telling them no.
Right. No, absolutely. No, and that's where I'm wondering if the notification area needs to have 2 different abstractions. One is basically transient messages, and the other is more sort of state notification, like kernel not running. Like that should just stay there. Like it shouldn't go away until the kernel starts running again.
Not really a notification, but yeah.
But
yeah, I mean, we've got busy, idle, and command mode, edit mode. So that is what you're talking about. It's just maybe for louder, more verbose messages of that same category.
Yeah,
current
and
state.
Being unable to write a notebook is another example of that. That like you should just see that that's always the case.
You could gray out the save button on the toolbar.
Well, eventually, yeah. No, that's.
Yeah.
Or just put a big red, / no save.
I think that is like a slightly easier case, because at least there, in that case, like you have UI that you can disable, which makes it a little bit more obvious.
Although it might, without telling the user why it's disabled, that could be really frustrating, right? Like, what the notebook has a bug. Why can't I save my notebook? The button doesn't work.
And so you can have notifications that are permanent, and if they're red, then they're somewhat visible. But I think. So I tested the UI for like when the kernel fails to start because it's missing. I showed that to a couple of people to get their like impressions of like what that was, and they like didn't really notice the notification thing, and so I think what's going to end up happening is that especially once we have the ability to have multiple kernels and you can switch between them very easily, but people only have one installed and they open a notebook that was created with a different kernel that they don't have.
Okay, so that's the case. Yeah.
Now, so they open the notebook and it doesn't work. They can't run it because they don't have that kernel, which is okay. You should be able to open it, but they might not understand why it's not working. They might not understand the concept of what it even means to really have different kernels. So they're really tricky issues.
Yeah, so here's a question. What if we, I mean, we had talked about changing the kernel selection widget. What if we replaced? I don't know what it would look like, but basically had a kernel indicator that was in the node, where our current kernel indicator is, that was a richer kernel indicator that could indicate the state of the kernel. Is it running? Is it erroring? Is it basically, and also display the language. And so, like, it could have, if you have a missing R kernel, it could be red and say R, and when you click it, it could have a message saying the R kernel is not running. It's not available on your system. You can edit the notebook, but not run, or some sort of fancier kernel notification thing. I don't know. I mean that.
Yeah, I think we can. Yeah, we can figure something out about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, going through, and just as the PR that cleans up a lot of the events and stuff on kernel and session.
Yeah.
Just carefully going through and saying, thinking about the state of the notebook of this. These are the various ways you can get. Well, these are the various ways you can get to execution doesn't work. There's WebSocket failures. There's the kernel never started because you don't have it. There's the kernel died and that you had a kernel and it eventually died. And there are a variety of ways to get to that state. And then just kind of step by step thinking, oh, okay, in this case, this kind of thing happened. The user should be notified with this level of intrusiveness, and then the kind of persistent visibility of the result of that. I think we need to just kind of think carefully, step by step, on the various states the notebook can be in.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
And I think that event cleanup PR should actually help with that. Help with the implementation of that.
Yeah. All right. So Jess, do you feel like we can continue these discussions on the pull requests and issues, or I mean, it sounds like there's some bigger UI questions that we're not going to answer today necessarily.
Yeah. I think for now this is fine. But I wanted to bring it up just to so everyone's aware that this is something that I've run into in a couple places now. So probably need to come up with something consistent eventually.
No, and I'm basically running into the same thing with the not writable notebooks. Like, how do you tell users about that in a way that they really see, but that's not frustrating, but that's sort of persistent? And so, yeah, it's.
Yeah, the multi-language stuff and the multi-user stuff both make failure cases that were not horrible to ignore things we should pay more attention to.
Yeah. So. All right. Well, we've been going almost 2 hours. Thanks everyone for hanging in there. It was definitely a marathon, and we will see everyone next week.
Yeah.
And see you guys on GitHub. All right.
Bye.
Bye.